The sun over New Mexico burned the color of blood that morning. The wind dragged dust across the market square like a warning no one heard. Men shouted over the cries of cattle, the crack of whips, the rattling of coins. In that noise, one voice broke through a child's, small and desperate. "Please, mister. Take her instead of me." Caleb Vance stopped walking. He hadn't planned to stop for anything. His boots were heavy with miles and grief, his eyes dulled by the kind of silence that comes after burying everything you love. But that voice, soft, trembling, pulled him back from the edge of his own ghosts. The girl stood barefoot in the dirt, hair tangled, hands clinging to the hem of his duster. Behind her, inside the corral, a woman lay bound to a post, skin pale, lips cracked, breath shallow. The slaver sitting nearby smirked. "Ain't worth much, either of 'em. You want one? Take your pick." Caleb's jaw tightened. He reached inside his coat, dropped a pouch of gold on the table. "I'll take both," he said quietly. The laughter died in the man's throat. Dust swirled between them as the wind shifted. Caleb didn't wait for change. He lifted the girl into his arms, then cut the woman free. The crowd stared, but no one spoke. And that's how a man who'd stopped believing in mercy found himself holding it. The ride back to Caleb's ranch carved a trail of silence through the desert. The sky stretched wide and merciless, washed in copper light. He rode steady, one hand holding the reins, the other cradling the small girl Lena against his chest. Behind him, the woman, Isabel, lay slumped across the saddle blanket, her wrist still raw from the ropes, her breath faint as smoke. By the time they reached the valley, dusk had painted the land in burnt orange. Caleb's ranch sat low among cottonwoods and quiet dust, an old cabin, a weathered barn, a corral where the wind still whistled through broken rails. Once, it had been a place filled with laughter, his wife's, his daughter's. Now it was a house of echoes. He carried Isabel inside, careful as if handling glass. The floorboards creaked under his boots, and for the first time in years, the air smelled of something other than loneliness, fear, hope, maybe both. He laid her on the bed that had belonged to his little girl, pulled a blanket up to her chin, and stared a long while. Her face, bruised and still, reminded him of a prayer said too late. Lena stood in the doorway, clutching her mother's shawl. "She's burning," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "We'll bring her down." He lit the stove, boiled water, crushed willow bark with the back of a spoon. The girl fetched cloth without being told. Together, in that dim light, man and child moved around the bed like they'd done it forever, each carrying something broken, and both trying to fix what they could. Morning crawled over the valley like a slow forgiveness. The first sound was the kettle hissing on the stove, then the creak of the rocking chair where Caleb had slept with his rifle across his knees. He hadn't meant to stay awake, but every breath from the woman on the bed sounded like it might be her last. When Isabel finally stirred, it was only a twitch, a weak flinch of the fingers, a tremor across her cracked lips. Caleb leaned forward, careful not to startle her. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Her eyes opened dark, sharp, full of fear. She tried to sit, gasped, clutched her ribs. "Where's my daughter?" Before he could answer, Lena came running from the corner of the room. "Mama!" The woman's face broke, pain and disbelief tangled together. She pulled the child to her chest, weeping into her hair. Caleb turned away, giving them space, staring out the window at the dead cottonwoods beyond. The world out there was the same, but something inside the cabin had changed. Later, when Isabel's strength returned enough to speak, she looked at him from across the bed. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would a man buy strangers?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He adjusted the fire, kept his gaze low. "Didn't buy," he said finally. "Just couldn't leave 'em." Isabel watched him for a long moment, her breath steadying, her voice quieter now. "No one does something for nothing, mister." And Caleb looked up, then eyes shadowed, haunted. "Maybe I ain't no one." Outside, thunder rolled over the desert horizon, the kind that never came without bringing trouble. For the next 2 days, the desert quiet seemed to hold its breath around the small ranch. Caleb worked from dawn till dusk, repairing fences, feeding horses, checking the creek for fresh water. But even with his hands busy, his mind wasn't still. The woman Isabel stayed inside, watching him through the small window, eyes wary like a caged animal that didn't yet know if the door was open or if it was bait. Lena followed him everywhere. She was small but stubborn, the kind of child who carried silence like a secret. When he worked the forge, she sat on the steps, humming to herself. When he saddled the horse, she fetched his gloves, and though she never spoke much, every once in a while she'd whisper, "She'll get better soon." Caleb would nod, not trusting his voice. That third evening, as the sun dropped behind the red hills, Isabel came to the doorway. She wore one of his late wife's cotton blouses. The sleeves rolled awkwardly over her bruised wrists. Her voice was hesitant. "You shouldn't have done this." Caleb didn't turn from the fence post he was mending. "Done what?" "Brought us here. Men will come for her. For me. I figured as much." He drove another nail into the rail. "Then why not send us away?" Caleb's hammer stopped mid-swing. "Because I've buried enough already." "Like," she said nothing after that, only watched him until the stars began to crawl out. That night, the storm broke. Rain hissed through the cottonwoods, drumming against the roof. Inside, the sound was almost tender. Caleb sat in the corner by the fire, cleaning his rifle. Lena was asleep on the rug with a small carved horse in her hand. Isabel stirred restlessly on the bed, fighting fever and nightmares. At one point she woke with a cry, sharp, strangled. She sat up, wild-eyed, clutching at her throat. Caleb was beside her before she could move. "Hey," he said softly. "You're here. You're safe." She swung at him with her fist. He caught her wrist, but not hard. "Let go," she gasped. "Don't touch me." He froze, released her at once, stepped back. The pain in her voice sliced deeper than any blade. "I'm not them," he said. "You don't owe me fear." Her chest heaved, eyes darting from him to the shadows of the room. "You bought me," she spat. "You think that makes you different?" He took a slow breath, forcing calm into his voice. "I didn't buy a thing. I paid to stop it happening again." She trembled, the storm flashing across her face. "Then what am I to you?" Caleb hesitated. "I'll leave." The word broke something open in her. She pressed her hands to her face and began to sob deep, shuddering sounds that seemed to shake the cabin itself. Caleb didn't move closer. He just stoked the fire and sat nearby, keeping watch until dawn bled across the window. Days passed. Isabel's fever broke. She began to walk again, quiet but steadier. She helped with small chores, boiling water, washing clothes, sweeping the porch. The rhythm of living returned slow, fragile. One morning, Caleb found her kneeling by the creek, washing Lena's dress. The girl splashed beside her, giggling. It was the first time he'd heard laughter in that valley in years. He almost smiled. Almost. Later, Isabel caught him watching. She said nothing, but a faint color touched her cheeks before she turned back to the water. By the fifth day, the peace shattered. Caleb was hauling hay when he saw 3 riders crest the ridge, dark shapes against the gold sky. His gut clenched. They rode too straight, too sure. Trouble. He wiped his hands, reached for the rifle leaning against the fence. The lead rider shouted as they approached, voice oily and confident. "Morning, mister. Fine spread you've got here." "Oh." Caleb didn't answer. He stood still, rifle loose in his hands but ready. The man dismounted, a tall figure in a brown duster, face carved by sun and arrogance. "Name's Maddox Crane," he said. "Me and my boys here got business with you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Don't recall inviting business," Crane grinned. "You've got property belongs to us. A woman, name of Isabel Moreno. Got the papers right here." He held up a folded contract stamped with crude ink. Caleb's eyes didn't flicker. "That paper's worth less than the man holding it." Crane's smile faltered. "Careful, cowboy. Ain't smart to mouth off to men who can bury you under your own fence." Behind him, the other 2 men shifted their rifles. Caleb could see their nerves through the false bravado, the kind of men who shot first if scared enough. He glanced toward the cabin. The curtain moved, Isabel watching. He saw Lena's small hand clutch the windowsill. "Leave," he said quietly. Crane laughed. "Not without what's ours." Caleb's voice dropped lower. "She's not yours. Not anymore. Everything's someone's," Crane replied, stepping closer. "You just ain't paid the right price yet." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, but his silence was a fuse burning fast. Crane saw it too late. Caleb spun, slamming his shoulder into the fence post. A hidden latch clicked, and from the hollow rail slid a double-barreled shotgun. He raised it smooth and fired. The blast thundered across the yard. One of Crane's men screamed, collapsing into the dust. The horses reared. Crane drew and fired back his bullet, grazing Caleb's arm, tearing through flesh. Blood spattered his sleeve. Lena screamed from inside. Caleb ducked behind the trough, pumped the shotgun, fired again. Crane's second man dove behind a boulder. Smoke and dust swallowed the air. "You're making a mistake, Vance," Crane shouted. "You think one bleeding rancher can stop what's coming?" Caleb's voice came steady through the chaos. "I ain't stopping you. I'm ending you." He fired once more. The shot tore through Crane's hat, grazing his scalp. The man cursed, stumbled back, then mounted his horse with his wounded partner's help. They fled into the red horizon, their threats fading into the wind. Caleb stood there a long moment, blood dripping through his fingers. The cabin door burst open. Isabel ran toward him, skirts whipping in the wind. "You're hurt," she cried, dropping to her knees. She tore the sleeve open. Blood soaked the fabric. "Not bad," he muttered through gritted teeth. "You're a fool," she said, voice trembling. "You could have been killed." "I've been dead before," he answered softly. "When I lost my family. Today, I'm alive." She looked up, startled. Something in his voice silenced her. She pressed her palms against the wound, tying a strip of her dress to staunch the bleeding. Her hands shook, but her touch was gentle. When she was done, he caught her wrist lightly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying." That night, she cleaned the wound again by lamplight, pouring whiskey over it. Caleb bit down on a rag, muscles tensing as she cut away the torn skin. "You've done this before," he managed. "I had a brother," she said. "He liked fights. I learned fast." Their eyes met brief, unguarded. For a heartbeat, the room held no pain, no past, just the sound of rain on the roof, and two souls learning how to breathe again. The following morning, Lena begged to ride the old mare grazing by the fence. Caleb hesitated, then lifted her onto the saddle. "Keep your hands steady," he said. She nodded solemnly, her small boots barely reaching the stirrups. Isabel watched from the porch, heart tight, as Caleb walked beside the horse, hand on the reins, guiding her daughter like a father teaching his own blood. When Lena leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck, she whispered, "Can I call you Papa now?" Caleb froze, his throat burned. He didn't answer, just held her close as the wind moved through the grass. Isabel's hand rose to her mouth. Tears blurred the world before her. For the first time in years, she wept not from fear but from something dangerously close to joy. That night, the cabin was quiet. Lena slept curled in the quilt. Isabel stood at the doorway of Caleb's room. He sat by the window, shirtless, changing his bandage. She hesitated, then stepped in. "She called you Papa," she said softly. He looked up. "I heard. She's never called anyone that before." He nodded, gaze distant. Didn't know what to say. "You didn't need to," she whispered. "You already answered." Silence filled the room, gentle, not heavy. She came closer, knelt beside him. "You saved her life, and mine." Caleb shook his head. "You saved mine back." Her hand found his. For a long moment, they just stayed there, scar to scar, heartbeat to heartbeat, both too tired for words but too alive to let go. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods, carrying the sound of tomorrow. The desert never forgot a debt. By the 7th morning, the sky wore a hard blue and the wind came from the south, carrying the smell of horses that didn't belong to Caleb Vance. He felt it before he heard them the way a rancher feels weather shifting in his bones. He stepped off the porch and shaded his eyes. Dust rose on the far side of the valley, a low brown wall rolling toward the cottonwoods. Riders. Not 3 this time. 8, maybe 9. Steel flashed, leather creaked, and somewhere beneath all that sound was the thin jingle of chains. Isabel appeared behind him, shawl tight over her bruised wrists. "Is it them?" "It's them," Caleb said. Lena pressed against Isabel's side. "Mama?" Caleb turned, voice steady. Inside. Bolt the door. If anything happens, you go out the back and run for the arroyo. The cottonwoods will cover you to the creek. Isabel didn't move. I am done running. Then, Caleb's mouth flickered, not a smile, not quite. Then be ready to choose when the time comes. The riders fanned out as they reached the yard. At the front sat Maddox Crane, brown duster flaring, hat low. Beside him rode a wiry man with a tin star pinned to his vest. Crane swung down, boots hitting dirt like a verdict. "Mornin', Vance. I brought the law, just like I promised." The wiry man tipped his hat, revealing a face puckered by old knife scars. "Deputy Marshal Silas Webb," he announced, flashing the star. "We've got a federal writ to collect stolen property and arrest a kidnapper." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You ain't a marshal," he said mildly. Webb's badge was dull and pitted. Federal stars didn't tarnish like that, but the men behind Webb only needed a story to point their guns at someone they wanted to shoot. Webb unfolded paper with lazy ceremony. "Indenture contract," he read. 1. Isabel Moreno, lawfully leased to Mr. Hector Marcado for term of 7 years. Witnessed by Judge Alton Hollis, signed in Santa Fe. He glanced up, smiling thin. She ran. "Your man here abetted her. Both violations. You got 5 minutes to hand her over." From the porch, the door creaked. Isabel stepped out, shawl slipping, eyes on the paper. Her face went colorless. "Hollis," she whispered. "I know that name." Crane's smile sharpened. "He knows yours, sweetheart." Caleb raised a hand slightly, small as a breath. It was enough to stop Isabel's forward step. Enough to hold the wind at the rim of the yard. "You forged that paper," Caleb said, gaze on Webb. Webb shrugged. "Don't matter if I did. People like their stories clean." Crane nodded at the men. "Circle the house." Horses shifted, hooves tearing dry grass. The circle narrowed. Caleb spoke low, like he was talking to a spooked colt. "Lena," he said without turning. "You listen to your mama and do what she says." The child's breath hitched. "Yes, Mr. Caleb." Crane lifted 2 fingers. The man on his left slid a coil of chain from his saddle horn. Isabel stepped past Caleb then, shawl falling, chin high. "You can take me," she said, voice clear though it trembled. "You leave the child. You leave him. This ends with me." Crane's eyes gleamed. "And waste a chance to turn a profit 3 ways? Don't be foolish. Profit ends today," Caleb said, and the way he said it made even the wind hold still. He set his rifle on the porch rail, palms open. The men moved, anticipating surrender. Caleb's right hand closed around the rail itself, around a notch he'd cut last winter. Wood gave with a soft crack. The rail lifted, hinged at its far end, and swung forward like a gate. A length of chain hidden inside whipped free. Caleb yanked, and a line of iron spikes he'd sunk along the fence popped upright from the dust, calf high, mean, enough to make any horse think twice about a charge. Crane's horse reared, screaming. Men cursed. A shot cracked wild, slamming into the post beside Caleb's head. Splinters stung his cheek. He dove, rolled, came up with the shotgun he'd hidden beneath the porch step this time. 2 blasts in the same breath. One man folded, another dropped his gun and howled as the pellets found his thigh. Chaos opened like a pit. Webb fired from the saddle. The bullet clipped Caleb's hat, spun it into the yard. Caleb felt the wind run free over his scalp and smiled without humor. He jacked the lever of an old Winchester he'd propped by the door, snapped a shot that cut Webb's stirrup strap. Webb tumbled, cursing, came up behind a water trough. "Enough," Crane bellowed. "Hold your fire." The yard fell into a twitching quiet. Horses blowing hard, men swearing under their breath, dust drifting like the last smoke from a dying chimney. Crane's voice shifted slick, patient. "You're outgunned, Vance. Walk away, and you live to bury them proper next time." Caleb's eyes flicked once to Isabel, once to Lena, and came back to Crane. He lowered the Winchester until the barrel pointed at the ground. "You brought the law," he said evenly. "Then let's use it. We ride into the town of Sangre Verde. We put this before a judge who ain't paid by your friends. If your paper's good, I'll stand down before God and men." Webb barked a laugh. "Ain't no judge in Sangre Verde. Caleb nodded like he'd expected the answer. Then we take it to Las Cruces. 25 miles. We ride in daylight. You keep your men in front where I can see 'em. I keep my rifle low. If you touch the girl before a courtroom hears her mama, I will ruin what's left of you. Crane's eyes narrowed, calculating. He looked at Isabel like a butcher prices a lamb. You believe a courtroom saves you? He asked her. I believe I'm done being traded like a saddle, she said. Something in her voice, plain, worn, unbreakable, made Crane pause. He didn't like it. He liked fear. It had a smell he understood. Resolve smelled like iron. Webb spat. We take them together. Ride now. Crane thought another long beat. Then he nodded, smile returning like a knife slipping back into its sheath. Fine. I'll bury you legal. They rode in a ragged procession under the late sun. Crane and Webb at the point. 4 riders spread wide. Caleb with the Winchester balanced across his lap. Isabel beside him. Lena between them on the saddle. The child sat so straight, so quiet, that Caleb's chest hurt to look at her. The road ran hard and bright, lined with yucca and grief. After an hour, the valley narrowed and the trail bent along a shallow ravine. A hawk circled overhead, its shadow sliding over them like a question. Webb glanced back, star flashing. How long you been playing husband, Vance? Caleb didn't answer. He watched the ground, saw the way Crane kept looking right toward a low stand of mesquite where the earth wore a churned look. Fresh hoof prints. He was leading them into a culvert, a place where men could vanish without a sound if they chose to. Caleb's fingers tightened on the stock. Isabel's thigh pressed against his. He felt the tremor she tried to hide. If they split the column, she whispered in Spanish so the men ahead wouldn't catch it. I will fall from the horse. Take Lena. Ride for the arroyo. You won't fall, he murmured back. Same language, same heat. You'll choose. What choice do I have? Exactly one, he said. The one you make. She was quiet after that. He could feel her thinking, the way a storm thinks before lightning sets the world on fire. They reached the mesquite. Crane lifted a hand, about to turn them into the ravine. That's when Lena spoke. Not to Caleb, not to Isabel, to the hawk. She lifted her face and said, very softly, please. The hawk screamed and dropped like a thrown stone. It skimmed so low past Crane's horse that the animal went mad, rearing, front hooves pawing the air. Crane swore and lost the reins. Webb's mount jerked sideways, slamming into another rider. For 3 heartbeats, the column lost its spine. Caleb didn't waste them. He drove his heels, yanking the mare left, away from the ravine, straight across the scrub. Isabel folded herself over Lena, one arm a wall. A shot snapped past Caleb's ear. Another kicked dirt at the mare's hooves. Caleb didn't fire back. He rode like he meant to break the horizon open and pour them all through. After them, Webb roared. They cleared the mesquite and found a shallow wash that ran north like a scar. Caleb dropped into it, the mare stumbling and catching. Pebbles clattering, bullets chewed the lip of the wash above them. A rider's shadow crossed, and then a thud and a scream as the horse caught one of Caleb's buried spike lines he'd set months ago against coyotes. He hadn't meant it for men, but men were what the world kept sending. Left, Isabel cried. There's a culvert. He saw it, a low spill of rock and cattail, where water lingered late into summer. They slid off the bank into ankle-deep mud, hooves sucking, the mare blowing foam. The wash cut toward a stand of cottonwoods, and beyond that, if God loved anyone today, an old wagon rode into the hills. They burst into the trees as the first rider hit the wash behind them. Webb, by the sound of the cursing. He fired blind. A branch exploded over Caleb's head, raining leaves. Down, Caleb barked. Isabel threw herself and the child low against the mare's neck. Caleb snapped a single shot in reply, aimed not at Webb but at a dead limb hanging above him. The limb cracked and fell, tangling Webb's reins. The deputy went over backward in a tangle of leather and profanity. They made the wagon road. The mare found her legs, stretched into a hard gallop. For a breath there was only speed and wind, and Lena's small fingers twisted in Isabel's blouse. Then the world opened, and there sat a wagon drawn crosswise in the road. Mules panicked, harness twisted. An old woman stood on the seat, arms flailing at the sky. "Move," Caleb shouted. The woman flung herself off just as the mare skidded, iron shoes sparking. The wagon held, barely. Caleb hauled the mare sideways and they slipped past, hub scraping stirrup, and then the world fell away again under the mare's pounding strides. They didn't stop until the hills swallowed them whole. They made camp in a dry bowl hidden by juniper, the kind of place only deer and men with reasons to vanish ever found. Caleb picketed the mare in shadow and checked Lena with hands that shook only a little. A graze across her forearm where a thorn had taken a bite. Nothing more. He let out a breath he hadn't known he'd caged. Isabel watched him, eyes unreadable. "You didn't shoot them when you could. Not the ones that don't need killing," Caleb said. "Not if there's another road." "Them. And Crane?" Caleb looked out over the dark. "He's a road that keeps turning back." Silence fell between them, deep and not unkind. Lena slept with her cheek on Isabel's thigh, hand still curled like she held the hawk's cry in it. When Isabel spoke again, her voice was low. "Alton Hollis is not a judge," she said. "He is a merchant of papers. He sells names. He sold mine." Caleb turned. "How?" "I signed a lease I could not read. It said I would cook, clean. It said nothing of chains." She lifted her wrist. The rope burned like a pale bracelet. "When I ran, they stamped another paper and called me thief. The men in the market, Crane's men, work for Hollis when the courts are closed." Caleb rubbed a hand over his face. The desert was full of ways to make cruelty look like bookkeeping. "If we get proof," he said. "Las Cruces has a circuit judge. Not bought. Not yet. We put it on his desk." Isabel pulled something from the hem of her shawl, a small leather pouch, cracked and stained. She opened it and slid out a folded scrap, thin as onion skin. "I kept a page," she said. "From Hollis's ledger. Dates, names, prices. Women moved like cattle. Boys, too." Caleb took it. Numbers crawled like ants across the page. And there, in a neat clerk's hand, Isabel M., 7-year indenture. Transfer fee noted. Witness, H. Marcado. Seal, Ah. "Hollis, you kept this through everything?" he asked. "I kept my name," she said simply. "The paper is only the shadow of it." Footsteps whispered in the brush above them. Caleb didn't look. He set the paper gently in Isabel's palm, closed her fingers over it. Then he rose, slow and quiet, and stepped into the dark beyond the fire's edge. "Come out," he said to the night. "Hands where I can see him." A man stepped from the juniper. Not Crane. An older shape, hunched from years in the saddle, hat in his hands. A star glinted on his coat, but not Webb's pitted tin. This one caught the firelight like clean water. U.S. Marshal. Real and heavy. "Evenin'," the man said. "Name's Marshal Ezra Pike. I've been following Crane 2 counties. Your fireworks made my job easier." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "Webb had a star," Pike snorted. "Webb had a souvenir. Stole it off a drunk in El Paso. I've got papers saying he's wanted in 2 territories for impersonating federal law. Crane's worse. Trafficking. Murder. If I can get Hollis's ledger, I can empty a jail into a courtroom and let the roofs fall where they may." Isabel stood, Lena stirring against her. "We have 1 page," she said. "Not the book." Pike's gaze shifted to her, then to Lena. Something in his face softened. "1 page is a beginning," he said, "but Crane knows he lost it. He'll come hard, and he'll come where you think you're safest." "The ranch," Caleb said. Pike nodded. "Or the road to Las Cruces. He won't risk a judge unless he owns him, and he don't own that one yet." Caleb lowered the rifle. "Then we draw him where law can see it." Pike's mouth tugged sideways. "You got a plan, Mr. Vance?" Caleb looked at Isabel. Their eyes held for a long breath. "We make him believe we're running," he said. "Then we turn and make him follow." "Not." "How?" Caleb picked up a coal from the fire and drew in the dust. A rough map of the valley, the wagon road, the arroyo, the market square of Sangre Verde. He marked the church with an X. "San Miguel," he said. "Father Tomas keeps his doors open. He don't like men with papers more than he likes men with guns. We reach that step before Crane does. He either drags us out in front of half the town, or he fires into a church. Pike grunted. He'd do it. He'll think about it, Caleb said. Thinking slows a man who likes to move on fear. Isabel crouched, fingertip on the map. And if he does not think, then I stop him. Caleb's eyes were iron. Dawn came thin and gray. They rode the wash north to where it spilled into a wide plain of saltbush and regret. Pike disappeared at first light with a promise to fetch eyes from Fort Selden, a patrol that might arrive in time to bless or to bury. Caleb didn't count on either. By mid-morning, the bell of San Miguel tolled once, then twice. Sangre Verde lifted its head from its sleep and squinted into the glare. Dust ghosts trailed behind 3 riders as they turned onto the main street. Caleb, hat low. Isabel upright despite the way the saddle punished old bruises. Lena sat before her, small hands gripping the horn. Faces appeared at windows. Doors opened a hand's width, then a foot. Father Tomas stepped into the churchyard, gray hair blowing, stole twisted in his fingers. Sanctuary, Caleb said when they reined in. Only one word, but it carried a century of meaning. The priest looked from Caleb's blood-crusted bandage to Isabel's wrists to Lena's eyes, which had learned too many alphabets for sorrow already. He lifted the latch and swung the church doors wide. Come in, and come quick. They crossed the threshold as the first hooves clattered onto the far end of the street. Crane, Webb, 4, then 6 riders. By the time they reached the churchyard fence, the street was rimmed with bodies, shopkeepers, ranch hands, women with aprons still dusted in flour. Crane saw the open doors and laughed. You think God writes law in this territory? Father Tomas stepped down the steps. He was shorter than Crane by a head, but something about him made men meet his gaze, as if he stood taller than the belfry. I think God remembers names, he said, and he will remember yours. Crane tipped his hat mockingly. Then he can spell it on the grave. Webb raised his gun. Bring them out. Inside, Isabel stood with Lena at the front pew. The church smelled of wax and cedar, and all the prayers people had whispered when nobody else could hear them. Caleb checked the windows. He could put a bullet through Webb from here. He could end one snake, but a nest would spill where one head fell. Let me talk, Isabel said. Caleb looked at her. You don't owe them a word. I'm not talking to them, she said. I'm talking to the town. She stepped into the doorway, hands raised, sleeves pulled back so the rope burns showed. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the way water carries through a canyon, quiet and everywhere. My name is Isabel Moreno, she said. He says I was leased. He says a man sold my work. Then another sold my body. I learned a word for it in English. It is not lease. It is theft. A murmur ran through the crowd. A woman near the bakery lifted a hand to her mouth. A boy in a brim too big for his head stared like he'd never seen a person say the truth with her whole throat before. Isabel held up the scrap of paper. This is a page from Hollis's book. Names, dates, prices. There are more pages, more women. Maybe someone you know, maybe someone you lost. Her eyes found the faces like she was reading a litany. If I walk back into chains, it tells them this town will not see. If I stand here and breathe free, it tells them this town has eyes. Crane's smile thinned to a wire. Enough. He spurred forward 2 steps and a single gunshot cracked the air. Not from Caleb. From the far end of the street, Marshal Pike sat on a horse by the livery, star bright, rifle easy but not lazy in his hands. 3 soldiers flanked him in dusty blue, sabers sheathed, faces blank as statues. Silas Webb, Pike called. In the name of the United States, drop that iron. You're wanted for impersonating a federal officer. Webb blinked. For the first time, his face lost swagger. You got no proof. Pike's rifle didn't waver. I got the man you stole your badge from, drunk but talkative in a cell. And I got a minister of this town ready to swear under oath you waved that star against women for coin. Crane's eyes cut to Webb calculation, flickering quick as a snake tongue. Fear makes bad friends. Boys, Crane said. If the law wants a badge, give 'em one. 2 guns swung toward Pike. Caleb stepped into the doorway and fired twice in a heartbeat, one shot into the dirt between Crane's horse and Webb's boots. The second through the buckle of a man reaching for his rifle to Pike's left. The buckle exploded. The man screamed, dropped his gun and his nerve. The street froze. Another step, Caleb said, And I stopped missing. Crane's gaze locked on him. Behind all that swagger was a thing as old as the first man who ever took what wasn't his hunger wrapped in hate. "You won't shoot me in front of a church," he said. Caleb's eyes were winter. "You sure about that?" A quiet fell so clean you could hear the wind gather itself beyond the last house. Then a woman's voice rose from the crowd. "Father Tomas," she said, voice shaking. "Is what the lady says true? Can the church keep her safe?" The priest didn't look away from Crane when he answered. "The church is only a house when men forget what it means. Today, it is a line. Cross it and you answer to more than law." Pike's horse sidled, metal jingling. "Crane, you and Webb ride out easy. I don't chase. You push this, and this whole street becomes your jury." Crane's mouth twisted. For 1 second, choice hung in the hot air like a coin that hadn't decided its face. Webb moved first. He fired not at Pike, not at Caleb, at Isabel. Caleb saw the muzzle flash and shoved Isabel sideways. The bullet took him in the shoulder, the same shoulder that had bled for her in the yard. He grunted, dropped to one knee. Lena screamed. Isabel fell with him, arms around the child. Caleb's world narrowed to a tunnel of white fire. He pushed up through it, through pain, through memory. Through the grave he had crawled out of the day he heard a little girl ask a stranger to take her mother instead. He stood. He leveled the Winchester. He fired. Webb's gun flew from his hand. The bullet had drilled the hammer clean, splitting it from the frame. Webb stared at the smoking ruin like it had betrayed him personally. Then he bolted. Crane wheeled his horse, swinging to grab Webb's collar as he ran. He shoved the deputy backward into Pike's soldiers like a man tossing a sack of rotten feed off his porch. "Take your fake law," he snarled, "and watch what real law looks like." Then he spurred for the alley, knocking a barrel into the street, scattering flour and curses. Pike raised his rifle, then lowered it with a savage sound Caleb had only heard men make when they knew a chase would cost civilians too dear. "Let him run," the marshal muttered. "He's run out of towns to eat, and we've got what we need." He nudged his horse forward, stopping at the church steps. He looked at Isabel, then at the crowd. "Folks," he said, voice even. "Anyone who's been told their kin signed a paper they never saw anyone with the name Hollis has under glass come to San Miguel tonight. Bring what you got. Letters, receipts, memories with edges. We're done letting men write law with coin." Murmurs swelled. A ranch hand lifted his chin. "My sister," he said. 2 winters ago. They said she went to work in Santa Fe. A seamstress near the bakery set her jaw. "My cousin, El Paso Road." A murmur became a wave. Not loud, not wild, just steady. The sound of eyes opening. Isabel pressed a hand hard against Caleb's shoulder to slow the blood. "You should sit," she said, voice shaking and fierce at once. "I will," Caleb said, throat raw. He looked at Lena. "You all right, little bird?" She nodded, tears shining big as the noon Sunday. "You didn't miss," she said. He almost laughed. "Not this time." Crane was gone, but not far. Men like him never rode far from the fear they lived on. Caleb knew the story wasn't finished. Stories like this never ended with one gunshot and a prayer. They ended when a town decided what it was. He looked at Isabel. She looked back. Between them passed not a promise, it was deeper and older than that. A choice. The one they'd make together. Outside, the bell of San Miguel rang again. Once, then twice. It sounded less like warning now, and more like a beginning. That night, San Miguel's nave filled with faces. Women with sleeves rolled high. Men with hats in their hands. A drummer from the fort leaning his stick against his knee like he wasn't sure if he was here to keep time or to keep peace. Marshal Pike spread what papers he had across the altar rail. Names. Dates. The torn page Isabel had saved sat on top like a keystone that made the arch hold. Father Tomas lit every candle he had, and then borrowed some from the mercantile. The light threw soft gold into corners where darkness had learned to breed. People stepped forward, not all at once, but enough to make the room breathe. A widow laid a letter on the rail. A boy brought a ribbon with a name stitched into it. A rancher brought the memory of a trail boss who'd bragged too loud and then disappeared before anyone could ask why his stories smelled of fear. Pike wrote. Tomas witnessed. The church turned, hour by hour. into a ledger Crane couldn't burn. Near midnight, the doors banged open so hard the candles shivered. A figure stumbled in, hat gone, shirt torn, blood dark on the sleeve. Webb. He fell to his knees in the aisle, eyes rolling white. "Crane," he gasped. "He's comin' with more men. He'll burn this place to the ground." Marshal Pike took one step, star bright even in candlelight. "Where?" Webb's mouth worked. Terror had finally taught him how to tell the truth. "Everywhere," he whispered. He brought the men he pays to look the other way. Sheriff Dugan, Hollis's clerk, half the saloon. He means to make an example. The candles guttered as if a wind had gone through a place where wind could not go. Caleb looked at Isabel. She reached for his hand. Her fingers slid into his. "Steady, sure. Then we choose now," she said. He nodded. He didn't pick up the Winchester to feel brave. He picked it up because the choice they'd made wanted a backbone. Outside, hooves gathered like thunder. Inside, the bell rope waited. Father Tomas wrapped it around his hand and looked at the town that had come to stand inside his church. "When a house becomes a line," he said softly, "it needs people to stand on it." He pulled. The bell began to ring, and the night answered. The bell of San Miguel cried through the night like a living thing. Each toll rolled over Sangre Verde and carried one simple message: "We are awake." Lanterns flared across the rooftops. Men stepped into the street, rifles in their hands but not trembling. Women gathered children inside the church and barred the doors. And in the open square, Caleb Vance stood shoulder to shoulder with Marshal Pike, watching the darkness on the south road grow teeth. Hoofbeats, dozens. Then the orange flicker of torches. Maddox Crane's riders spilled from the desert like a sickness returning to a body that had begun to heal. Pike raised his voice. "By law of the United States, drop your arms and surrender." Crane laughed. "You think that bell makes you God, Marshal?" He swung a torch high. "Tonight I burn the bell, the church, and every fool who thinks dirt can change its name." He hurled the torch. It arced through the black like a comet, then shattered against the stone wall and fizzled out in rainwater. A boy from the bakery had climbed the roof and poured half a barrel of wash water across the tiles just in time. The crowd roared, not with fury but with something fiercer belief. Caleb stepped forward. "You had your chance, Crane. Walk away." Crane drew his revolver instead. "You first, preacher." The shot cracked, but the muzzle flash came from Pike's rifle. Crane's pistol spun from his hand and clattered into the dust. He stared at it, stunned, then bared his teeth and spurred straight at Caleb. Caleb met him halfway. The two men collided beside the well, Crane swinging with the weight of every debt unpaid. Caleb ducked, drove a fist into Crane's ribs, felt bone shift. Crane snarled, clawed for a knife, slashed once. Steel kissed flesh across Caleb's ribs. Pain flashed white, but Caleb didn't stop. He caught Crane's wrist, twisted, and the knife fell. The men crashed against the well stones, torches tossing shadows around them like ghosts circling for blood. "Why her?" Crane spat. "Why risk everything for a stranger?" Caleb's voice came rough. "Because someone should have risked for mine." He drove his knee up, wrenching Crane's balance, then slammed him backward onto the stones. The fight went still except for their breathing, two animals that had run out of hate but not heartbeat. Crane's eyes flicked past him to Isabel standing in the doorway of the church. Shawl gone, shotgun steady. "You gonna let her finish it?" he hissed. Caleb didn't look back. She already did. Crane followed Caleb's gaze too late. Isabel's finger closed on the trigger. The blast tore through the torch behind him, showering sparks. Fire whooshed upward, torches dying, light returning to the stars. Marshal Pike's voice thundered. "Enough, M." Soldiers surged forward, wrestled Crane into chains slick with his own sweat. The rest of his men dropped weapons and melted into the crowd, swallowed by faces that no longer feared them. When silence fell, it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of something finished. Caleb leaned against the well, hand pressed to his ribs. Blood seeped through his shirt, warm but not deep. Isabel ran to him, dropped the shotgun, caught his arm. "You're hurt." "Ugh. Always am," he said, and almost smiled. Lena wedged herself between them, small hands tugging at his coat. "Papa, you stop now." The word Papa came so easily it didn't even sound like a question anymore. Caleb crouched, ignoring the pull in his side, and lifted her. "I'll stop," he promised. "We all will." Across the square, Marshal Pike chained Crane to the hitching post. "You'll ride to Las Cruces tomorrow," he said. "Judge Porter's honest and mean. Two things you've never met." Crane only laughed, blood on his teeth. "You think that woman's page will hang me?" Pike looked toward Isabel, who still held the scrap of paper close to her heart. "No," he said. "The town will." Father Tomas raised the church door wide. Candlelight spilled onto the square, touching the faces of people who'd spent too long in the dark. "Bring him inside," he told the soldiers. "He'll wait for dawn where the light stays." For the first time in years, Sangre Verde slept with its doors unlocked. Morning came clean. The storm had broken and left the air smelling of wet dust and mesquite. Caleb woke in the pew where Isabel had made him lie down. Lena snored softly under his arm, hair tangled across his chest like sunlight. Isabel knelt nearby, washing the cut along his ribs with careful hands. "You should see a doctor," she murmured. "Already have one." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "Stubborn man. A live man," he corrected. Outside, the townsfolk gathered, whispering, carrying buckets, mending fences. Pike mounted his horse, nodded to them both. "You did more here than the law ever could, Vance. Maybe that's how it's supposed to work, people first. Papers later." Caleb stood slowly. "You heading out? Crane's got a long road to judgment. I'll be back when he reaches the gallows." "Then we'll keep the bell ringing," Caleb said. The marshal touched his hat and rode west. Isabel turned toward the sunrise. The light caught the faint scars on her wrists and turned them silver. She looked at them for a long moment, then at Caleb. "What now?" she asked. He glanced at Lena, chasing sparrows across the yard, laughter like wind in fresh grass. "Now we build what they tried to burn." She reached for his hand. He took it. Their fingers fit without ceremony, like a thing they'd both remembered instead of learned. Together they walked toward the porch. The sun climbed higher, washing the valley in gold. The church bell rang once, soft and full, not warning this time, welcoming. For the first time since the war, New Mexico felt wide enough for hope. Weeks passed, and the desert began to bloom again. The rains came early that spring, soft and sure, coaxing green from the hills and forgiveness from the earth. Caleb's ranch, once quiet as a grave, breathed like something alive. Fences mended, horses fattened. The porch that had sagged under the weight of loneliness now held laughter every night. Lena learned to whistle. Not a sweet tune, not yet, but enough to make the horses perk their ears. Isabel taught her to read by the window, tracing each letter slow and proud. When the girl spelled home without help, Caleb stepped outside and wiped his eyes under the excuse of checking the barn. One afternoon, Father Tomas rode out with a small wagon. He brought two things: a wooden cross for the grave Caleb had never marked, and a folded parchment signed by Judge Porter. The letter declared that the indenture contract of Isabel Moreno was null, void, and illegal. Attached was another paper, stamped and sealed, the deed to a parcel of land bordering Caleb's. In recognition of testimony and courage in service of the territory, it read. Isabel held the paper with trembling hands. "What will I do with land?" she asked. "Live," Caleb said simply. That evening they buried the cross on the hill overlooking the cottonwoods. Caleb carved two names into it, his wife's and daughter's, and beneath them, just one word: peace. Isabel stood beside him, her fingers finding his, her silence saying what words never could. When night fell, the three of them sat on the porch, wrapped in the same blanket. Lena slept against Isabel's shoulder. Crickets sang in the grass. Caleb's arm rested around them both, his eyes lifted to a sky no longer empty. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Isabel asked softly. He shook his head. "Not anymore. Everything I lost was leading me here." She smiled, tired, certain. "Then we build here." The wind carried the scent of rain again. Somewhere in the distance, the bell of San Miguel tolled once, then twice, and the sound rolled across the valley, low and warm. In that sound lived everything they had fought for, every promise unspoken but kept. A man who had forgotten mercy found it again. A woman who had been silenced found her name. And a little girl who once begged a stranger to take her mother instead now had both. The stars leaned close, listening, and New Mexico slept in peace.